The Isles have always carried a kind of weight, a mystery that clung to the soil like mist. Long before the Romans set foot on our shores, people whispered that these lands were alive with spirits, with gods who lingered in the forests and rivers, demanding sacrifice. But Rome came with its armies, its roads, its single god, and its brutal certainty. They paved our wild hills, carved their temples into our valleys, and pressed their Latin tongue into our mouths, until we almost believed their order would last forever. It didn't. When Rome collapsed, it felt like the sun itself had fallen from the sky. Their legions marched home. Their governors abandoned the villas, and what they left behind was ruin. The walls crumbled. The coins lost their worth, and those who had grown fat under Roman law found themselves hunted like sheep when the wolves of the north came. The Angles, the Saxons, the Jutes, raiders who saw our weakness as an open feast, descended on us without mercy. I remember the silence in the villages after their raids, the smoke still hanging in the air, the charred beams jutting like black teeth. Brothers turned against brothers, each kinglet clawing at his neighbor's land, while foreign blades cut us down. The priests said God had abandoned us. The old ones muttered that our ancestors' gods were punishing us. Either way, there was no hope, only blood. But then, among the whispers of ruin, a prophecy began to spread. The tale of two brothers who would rise when the Isles bled most. Sons of a noble Roman line, Ambrosius and Uther Pendragon, heirs to the dragon's standard, the last hope of our people. I cannot tell you if it was faith or desperation that made us believe, but in those days of despair, even the hint of destiny was enough to keep men clinging to their swords. Ambrosius rose first, and for a time it seemed the prophecy might be true. He pushed back the Saxons with fire and cunning, rallied men who had forgotten loyalty. We whispered his name like a prayer. But fate is cruel, and his reign was short. He died before his work was done, leaving his younger brother Uther to bear the weight of salvation. Uther Pendragon. His name meant dragon's head, and when he raised his banner, men followed. He carried himself with the fire of one chosen, and though the land still groaned under raids and famine, a new kind of hope took root. They said perhaps God had not abandoned us after all. Perhaps destiny would yet raise a king who could bind the Isles together. And in that fragile hope, our story began. I served Uther when his name still lifted men to their feet like a trumpet. We were iron and ash, riding from monastery ruins to river fords, scattering Saxon war bands with the last discipline Rome left us. He fought like a man trying to bully fate into bending. By the fire, you almost believed the island would be whole again. After a winter campaign, courts swelled with victory noise and the ache of losses. Then I saw the thing that would unmake him. She arrived with a Cornish retinue, a presence that burned through the room before her name, Igraine, Duchess of Cornwall. The hall went quiet in a way steel cannot command. She had that grave beauty that refuses to be owned. Uther's gaze found her and did not let go. He spoke to her as kings do, polite words fitted over appetite. She answered as noble women must, weighing each syllable. I have seen him watch battlefields with less hunger. Whispers outran riders. Before the candles guttered, the hall knew. The king desired the Duchess. Desire is a tame word. What he felt was a fever that made his hands restless and his judgments quick. He called for her at feasts, found excuses to speak, circled her with favors that felt like snares. Igraine refused him without refusing the crown. No scandal, only the steady stone of a married woman's honor. Her husband, Duke Gorlois, was no fool. He saw the net and tore it with rage. One night he left the hall with his men, armor half-buckled, eyes hot with humiliation. He accused the king of dishonor and fled before dawn, bearing Igraine toward Cornwall. It should have ended with distance, with time, but pride is the brother of desire, and both are cruel. Advisers begged Uther to let the matter cool. The Saxons pressed the eastern shore. Winter stores are thin. Our soldiers needed rest. He listened, then gave the order that made every man in the chamber lower his eyes. We would march west, not to push back pagans or protect the helpless, but to besiege a loyal duke because the king could not master his own heart. I wanted to protest, and did not. Men forgive a king his temper. They forgive blood if it keeps him alive. But to stain the banner for desire felt like trading our last coin for a dream. Uther did not ask for blessing. He took it. The dragon standard rose, drums rolled, and we turned our backs on the Saxon threat to chase a woman's shadow across the moors. As we rode, the countryside watched us with hard faces. Priests muttered that God does not favor kings who lay siege to vows. Women spat at our horses' hooves. Uther kept his jaw set and his eyes forward. In the evenings he spoke little, and when he did it was of her voice, her steadiness, the way light found her hair. He made desire sound like destiny. The siege began. Cornwall's cliffs holding the sea like a secret, beacons smoldering along the coast, Gorloy's steel behind stone. We dug trenches in salt rain and doubt. Night after night, the king stood on the ridge above the camp and watched the lamps in the grains keep, a man staring at a star he meant to seize. Then I knew we were no longer fighting for the island. We were fighting for a hunger that would devour it. The siege dragged on like a wound that would not close. Our soldiers grew lean from salted meat and damp bread. Their hands blistered from hauling stone and timber against walls that refused to fall. Gorlois fought with the fury of a man defending more than land. He fought for the honor of his wife, and each arrow from his battlements felt dipped in his defiance. Uther grew restless, pacing the mud of camp like a caged beast. At night, I would see him staring across the valley toward Tintagel's high walls, his face carved by firelight, eyes burning with something far darker than strategy. He wanted a grain, not peace, not victory, not even glory. He wanted her, and it made the war madness. One storm-heavy night, he summoned Merlin, the old wizard, half-priest, half-shadow, stood calm beneath the dripping torches, his beard slick with rain, his eyes unreadable. Uther spoke of desire, of frustration, of the injustice of a world that placed her in another man's arms. He demanded a way. Merlin listened in silence, and when he finally answered, it was not with counsel, but with a bargain. He told Uther that fate could be bent, that flesh could be deceived, that magic could put him in Gorlois' shape. The king leaned forward like a starving man offered bread. I saw the hunger take root, saw the moment when desire buried duty. Uther agreed before Merlin had even finished, promising the unborn child of the wizard's care in return. It was a vow made in shadows, and none of us could look upon it without shame. That night Gorlois rode out, leading men in a desperate sally. Uther marched with us to meet him, but his mind was already elsewhere. As swords rang in the rain, he vanished, carried by Merlin's trickery through storm and darkness to Tintagel's gates. And there, in stolen form, he was welcomed by Igraine. I will not tell you what passed in her chamber, only that she believed it was her husband who returned from battle, that her grief was softened by love, that she yielded thinking it was her last night with the man she cherished. By dawn, Gorlois lay dead on the field, cut down in the mud, while Uther lay in his bed of victory, whispering a woman's name not his to claim. When the child was born, Igraine wept with joy and sorrow, for the world had shifted beneath her without her knowing. Merlin came with cold hands and colder words, reminding Uther of his bargain. I watched the king, once so proud, place his own son into the arms of the man who had woven lives from smoke. The boy was Arthur, though no one knew his name yet, not even the woman who bore him. Igraine's grief never left her eyes, though Uther took her as queen. She had lost a husband, gained a king, and delivered a son stolen from her arms. Uther did not see the wound he had carved into her, or if he did not care. He had what he wanted. Yet even then, I knew the cost would follow him like a shadow he could never outrun. Hope hardened into plan. Uther spoke of a kingdom no map had drawn, law from Cornwall's cliffs to the broken Roman roads. If wolves run in packs, he said, men can do the same. He dreamed of a hall without corners where no man sat higher than another. The young whispered a word for it. Camelot. He bargained where he could and fought where he must. He married Igraine and wore victory like a bandage. Petty kings counted our spears. Saxons pressed the coast. In the west, our allies measured how soon a strong king might stumble. The blow came from the table. We met in a marsh-ring fort to seal a winter truce. A cup changed hands. A beacon flared wrong. A rider loosed a signal arrow. Each swore the other moved first. I remember the hiss of a spear through wet air, and the king bending around it, iron blooming from beneath his mail like a black flower. We hauled Uther to the horses as the fort turned to fire. He did not curse. He looked past us. The healers whispered prayers, but the spear was dressed in poison. His breath shortened, his hands went cold. Merlin found us at dawn. He laid a hand on Uther's breast and listened. "Not yet," he said. The king's eyes found mine. "If I die," he rasped, "the island dies fighting over my name." We rode to standing stone above a river bend, older than Rome. Priests came. Farmers came because rumor runs faster than duty. Uther slid from the saddle and stood because pride would not let his knees buckle. He drew his sword and asked for silence. "Men of this land," he said, voice torn but iron, "we bleed because every hand grasps. Let the land choose a hand. I plant the steel and stone, by God's will, and by what guarded this hill before us. Only the rightful king shall draw it. Until then, let quarrels sleep." He lifted the blade and drove it down. The stone sang. Sparks leapt. The sword seated to the hilt and would not tremble. I tried it once when no eyes were on me. It did not move. Word outran winter. Lords came to tug at destiny and found iron that refused lineage. Some cried witchcraft. Others swore we hit a key, but the stone answered every grasp with silence. A thin peace held more confusion than faith. Uther failed quickly after that day. He asked for the boy. Merlin's answer was a cloak. "He is where kings are made." The king smiled at the lie and did not name it. He made me promise to keep the dragon's standard intact. I promise, because some promises keep men from turning wolf. He died as the first frost filmed the fun. No horns called. We set him in earth with his shield over his heart. By sunset, 3 claimants had already sent riders. Civil war seeps. Skirmishes on old borders. Odes rewritten. Priests preaching patience while hiring guards. I held the hill a month and watched men fail the sword and ride off angry enough to start small wars. Yet in the space between grief and fury, a rumor sprouted. Somewhere a nameless lad was growing into the hand the stone awaited. I might not have believed it if the nights had not been so long, and hope not so rare. But I had seen a king force his willing to grant it, and asked the land to remember. Some things do not forget. The years after Uther's death were years of dust and blood. Lords bickered. Saxons pressed, and the sword and the stone grew moss while men fought around it. We all but forgot the prophecy. Some mocked it as an old trick. Others swore it was the devil's work. But none could pull the blade. Not a duke, not a bishop, not a single proud son of Rome's last line. Then came the great tournament in London. The city had swollen with lords and their retinues, armor gleaming brighter than the broken streets. Each noble came with a claim, each eager to prove himself not only by arms but by the impossible sword. They built tilts, raised banners, and called a contest of honor, though we all knew it was a market of thrones. Among the servants and squires was a boy hardly old enough to shave, Arthur, foster son of Sir Ector, squire to his foster brother Kay. He carried armor, fetched water, lived in the shadow of men too busy with glory to notice him. I had seen him once before, quiet, eyes too serious for his age, as if he listened to the world more than he spoke to it. On the morning of the just, Kay realized he had forgotten his sword. Panic struck him, for no knight could appear unarmed before such a gathering. He cursed Arthur, who ran through the crowd to fetch it. The boys searched high and low, but the pavilion was locked. Desperate, he cut across the churchyard and saw it. The old stone half buried, the blade gleaming in the gray light of dawn. I was there. I swear to you, I saw no ceremony, no struggle, no fire from heaven. Arthur only looked at the sword as if it were an ordinary thing. He stepped forward, set his hand on the hilt, and pulled. It slid free with a sound like a sigh, as though the stone itself had been waiting for him. He carried it back to Kay, thinking nothing of it, and placed it in his hands. Kay's face drained of color, for he knew at once what weapon it was. He claimed it himself at first, but Sir Ector pressed him, and Arthur, puzzled, admitted where he had taken it. The crowd swelled, and nobles demanded proof. They marched Arthur back to the stone. thrusting him forward like a lamb to slaughter. He obeyed without protest, slipped the blade back into its rocky sheath, and when they challenged him, he drew out again. Once, twice, a third time, each time as effortlessly as lifting a reed from water. The square erupted in chaos. Some cried miracle, others blasphemy. Lords swore it must be trickery, demanded trials, called for blood. Yet again and again, Arthur placed the sword in stone and drew it, until no one could deny what they had seen. The boy no one noticed had done what the mightiest men of the realm could not. When the bishop stepped forward and declared him Uther's true son, many shouted treason. Yet there was something in Arthur's face, calm, unshaken, that silenced them. He did not revel, did not boast. He only looked down at the sword in his hand, as if he knew already the weight it carried would never leave him. That was the day prophecy became flesh. A nameless squire became king. The stone had chosen, and with it, so had the land. Arthur's first months as king were not feasts but reckonings. Lords who bent the knee at the stone sent champions to test the boy's right. We rode from grievance to grievance, settling claims by single combat. I carried the banner. Merlin rode beside the king like a shadow men forgot until it moved. At Betrayal, a knight blocked the road, black shield, black helm. Some named him King Pellinor. Others called him the Black Knight, a man who honored law as far as his blade could reach. He demanded toll, the king's pride on the ground. Arthur did not boast. He handed me his cloak and stepped forward with the sword he had drawn from the stone. The opening passes were clean. Pellinor fought like weather. Arthur like water finding seams in rock. Twice he turned the black shield, twice slipped under it, patient and exact. Then fate put out a foot. Arthur rose into a finishing cut, and Pellinor's counter met him at the hilt. The sound, iron undone, rang through my teeth. The royal blade sheared in two and fell into the mud. Yield, the Black Knight said, courtesy in his stance. No shame in it. Arthur looked at the broken sword the way a son looks at a father's grave. Loss, not fear. He lifted the stump as if alone might mend it. Pellinor came on again. He would have died there if Merlin had not stepped between them and taken a stroke on a staff that didn't break. Enough, he said, and the forest listened. To Arthur he murmured, there is a better blade for a better king. Come. We left the road while Pellinor waited baffled but not insulted. Merlin led us through alder and willow to a lake held still as unspilled wine. Mist lay on it like breath. Kneel, he told the boy. Arthur set the broken sword across his palms, as if offering his own failure. Then the water gathered. From the center rose a woman's arm pale as carved ivory, clothed in silk that moved because it was water. In her hand was a sword whose light did not belong to the sun. Arthur did not reach. He waited. Ask, Merlin said. Lady, Arthur whispered, may I bear this blade for the keeping of justice, and may it bear me only so long as I keep faith? The arm tipped grave assent. He took the weapon and sighed, not at the sharpness, but at the balance, as if it had waited for him as long as the stone had. Excalibur, Merlin named it, and the name sealed the lake back into silence. The lady also offered a scabbard dark as moss. Merlin's voice cooled. Value this above the sword. While it girds you, blood will not love to leave your body. We returned to the road. Pellinor watched the new blade come up and saluted. The second bout was brief. Arthur did not humiliate him. He only laid the flat to the older man's shoulder, a touch that meant mercy more than victory. Pellinor laughed, astonished, and went to one knee. That night, by the fire, Arthur turned the hilt in his hands like a penitent with a prayer stone. I thought the blade made the king, he said. No, Merlin answered. The king makes the blade, and the scabbard keeps him long enough to try. The kingdom began to breathe again. With Excalibur at his side, Arthur rode not as a boy with luck, but as a king men trusted. He settled quarrels, broke the power of raiders, and in every hall his name gathered weight. Yet it was in Camelot that destiny set a snare sweeter than steel. King Leodegrance was besieged by Northumbrians, his walls shaking, his banner sagging. Arthur rode to his aid with only a handful of knights and farmers turned soldiers, more hope than host. I thought it madness. But madness can be courage in the right heart. In single combat before the gates, Arthur met the Northumbrian champion, a brooding male with shoulders like oaken doors. The fight lasted until the sun bruised the sky. Blow by blow, Arthur wore him down, and when the man stumbled, Arthur pressed Excalibur's flat to his throat. Victory was not in killing him, but in showing mercy when a crowd expected blood. The siege broke, and the city cheered Arthur as if he were their own son. It was there he saw her, Guinevere, daughter of Leodegrance, pale and bright as though the smoke and ruin bent away from her. She walked to him as though she knew the field belonged to him now. I watched the king's face shift. He had looked at women before, but never like this. Not hunger, not possession, but wonder, as if he had been waiting for her without knowing it. Guinevere spoke little, but her smile lingered in him like a wound he did not want healed. Soon the talk in camp was not of Northumbria, but of the king's heart. Merlin said nothing, only watched the girl with eyes that measured not her beauty, but her shadow. When Arthur asked for her hand, Leodegrance gave her freely. Overjoyed, and with her, he gave a gift that mattered more than dowry or gold. The Round Table, a circle of oak where no man sat above another. Arthur saw it not as furniture, but as a covenant. Here knights would swear not to ambition, but to service, not to greed, but to justice. The wedding at Camelot was like nothing the isle had seen. Bells clanged from every tower. Lords came from as far as the Orkneys, and common men filled the meadows with song. Arthur stood in his crown and armor, young still, yet tempered by battles, his hand joined with Guinevere's beneath the arch of the new hall. For a moment, the island forgot its wounds. We feasted until dawn. Cups clashed, minstrels sang, knights swore oaths at the Round Table, each man pledging to defend the weak and hold truth above pride. I looked around the circle and thought, perhaps this is the golden age, the dream Uther only spoke of but his son might live. Yet I could not forget the way Merlin's gaze lingered on Guinevere, not with malice, but with the weight of foresight. Joy is always fragile in this land, and the higher the flame, the darker the shadow it casts. For now, though, Camelot was light, and Arthur was every inch the king we had prayed for. Camelot learned to sing in those days. Markets filled the streets. Children chased knights for a touch to their helms, and justice, ordinary daily justice, began to feel possible. Then a rider crossed the meadow beneath the walls, and the singing turned to held breath. He came alone, tall, with a scar along his jaw, his shield blank as if he needed no name. He asked for lodging and a chance to serve. Lancelot du Lac, he said, and the name felt as though the air had been saving it. Arthur welcomed him without testing. Lancelot moved through the yard like a sword through water. He helped the boy lift a pail, fixed a groom's buckle, then shattered 3 spears at the list before the crowd could decide whom to favor. He dismounted to raise the men he had unhorsed and bowed to Arthur as if he had won nothing at all. By supper the court adored him. He refused gift that would have fed 10 households, and asked instead where the old and frightened slept when nights turned cold. I thought, this is the kind of glory that does not need trumpets. Guinevere thanked him for mercy at the lists. He dropped his gaze, not shy but careful, as if he knew eyes could be weapons. Their words were nothing, courtesy and gratitude, yet the air between them gained an edge I could not name. I looked to Merlin, and found him already looking. Do you see it? I asked later. I see a line on a map, he said. I do not yet know if it marks a road or a border. We gave Lancelot a seat at the Round Table. He took the oath without flourish. To defend the helpless, to keep faith, to speak truth even against myself. Some speak vows like wine, he spoke them like bread. Peace made work instead of idleness. Missions multiplied. Villages reclaimed from fear, bridges repaired, quarrels settled without blood. Lancelot rode where the work was hardest, and returned with dust on his cloak and quiet on his face. Arthur trusted him easily. The court followed as courts will. Only once did the music falter. A storm cracked over the hall. Lightning threw every shadow onto the walls. Lancelot paused at the threshold while Guinevere stood within, lamp lifted, hair lit like flame. It lasted a heartbeat. He bowed and walked on. No one else seemed to notice, but something in me learned a new kind of fear. Not of swords, but of goodness pressed too near to love. No doom was spoken, no curse carved. Only a good man arrived, and a good queen met him, and the world shifted 1 grain. That is how great things end. No thunder first, only the soft hinge of a door. Arthur slept that night with Excalibur at his side, and the scabbard safe on its peg. He dreamed of roads joined, laws agreed, fields sown without fear. I wish it had lasted. But a kingdom is a human thing, and human things break. Still, I believe in what we built. A circle that makes men face one another as equals. Mercy when killing would be easier. A boy who lifted a sword like a reed and became a king because he would not boast. If the golden age must fracture, let it leave light in the cracks for those who come after. That is why I have told you this, so you will know how close we came to being whole.